The 12 disciples, often referred to as apostles, were crucial to Jesus' ministry and the early development of Christianity. They came from diverse and unexpected walks of life. Fishermen, a tax collector, and even a political zealot were among them. Despite their differences, these men shared a unified purpose: to follow Jesus and spread his teachings. It's remarkable to think that such an eclectic group was chosen for such an extraordinary mission. Each of them played a vital role in sharing the message of the gospel. Interestingly, their number, 12, symbolized the 12 tribes of Israel, signifying the continuation and fulfillment of God's plan for humanity. The disciples were more than mere followers. They were Jesus' close companions. They witnessed his miracles, absorbed his teachings, and stood by him during his crucifixion and resurrection. What's striking is that Jesus didn't choose them for their status, influence, or social standing. Instead, he saw their potential to grow and to carry forward the message of God's kingdom. Over time, they would lay the foundation for the Christian church, building the framework for a faith that would expand far beyond Judea. Though each disciple had unique traits and roles, they shared a common mission: to testify about Jesus' life and teachings, and to carry his message to all corners of the earth. This mission often put their lives in danger, but they never backed down. While they weren't without flaws, Peter's denial of Jesus or Thomas's moments of doubt, for instance, they mirrored the human experience of grappling with faith. Their stories remain relatable and inspiring to believers even today. Through their lives, the disciples taught lessons about perseverance, leadership, and faith. They weren't perfect, and their imperfections are evident in the gospel accounts. Yet, these very flaws underscore how God can use ordinary people for extraordinary purposes. By choosing to follow Jesus, they not only became his students, but also his messengers, tasked with bringing the good news of salvation to the world. Simon Peter stands out as one of the most prominent and relatable disciples. His story is one of transformation, from a humble fisherman to a foundational leader in the early Christian church. Born in the small fishing village of Bethsaida, Simon, later named Peter, worked alongside his brother Andrew and their father in a demanding and physically tough trade. Fishing required strength, teamwork, and resilience, traits that later proved essential for Peter's leadership. Peter's life changed forever when he met Jesus. According to the Gospel of John, Andrew introduced Simon to Jesus, proclaiming, "We have found the Messiah." In that first meeting, Jesus gave Simon a new name, Cephas, meaning rock in Aramaic, translated as Peter in Greek. This was a prophetic moment, hinting at Peter's future role as the steadfast foundation of the church. Peter's official calling is one of the most well-known stories in the Bible. As recounted in the Gospel of Luke, he and his fellow fishermen had spent a frustrating night on the Sea of Galilee, catching nothing. At daybreak, Jesus instructed them to cast their nets again. Though skeptical, they obeyed, and their nets overflowed with fish. Overwhelmed, Peter fell at Jesus' feet, declaring, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." But Jesus reassured him, saying, "Do not be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." This marked the moment when Peter left his old life behind to follow Jesus. Peter often acted as a leader among the disciples. He was the first to declare Jesus as the Messiah, prompting Jesus to affirm, "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." This statement has been the subject of theological debates for centuries, especially within Catholicism, where Peter is considered the first pope. Despite his leadership, Peter's story is deeply human. He was courageous yet impulsive, faithful yet flawed. When Jesus walked on water, Peter was bold enough to step out onto the waves but faltered as fear overtook him. And during Jesus' arrest, Peter denied knowing him 3 times, just as Jesus had predicted. After realizing his betrayal, Peter wept bitterly. However, Peter's story didn't end in failure. After Jesus' resurrection, Peter reaffirmed his love for him in a touching moment by the Sea of Galilee. Jesus asked Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" mirroring the 3 denials, and entrusted him with the mission to feed my sheep. From that moment, Peter emerged as a bold leader in the early church. Peter's role after Jesus' ascension was pivotal. At Pentecost, filled with the Holy Spirit, he preached to a crowd, leading to the conversion of thousands. He also played a crucial part in opening the church to Gentiles, challenging Jewish customs that excluded non-Jews. According to tradition, Peter eventually traveled to Rome, where he was martyred during Nero's reign. Believing himself unworthy to die as Jesus had, Peter requested to be crucified upside down. His humility, faith, and unwavering dedication define his legacy. Next, James and John, the brothers known as the Sons of Thunder, were among Jesus' inner circle. Their boldness and fiery temper earned them this nickname, but they were also deeply loyal to Jesus. Like Peter, they were fishermen from the Sea of Galilee, leaving their nets and their father to follow Jesus without hesitation. James, often called James the Greater, became the first disciple to be martyred. He was executed by Herod Agrippa, marking a significant moment of persecution for the early church. John, on the other hand, lived a long life, penning some of the most profound texts in the New Testament, including the Gospel of John and Revelation. While James exemplified courage and sacrifice, John is remembered as the beloved disciple. His writings emphasize themes of love and faith, and he was present at key moments in Jesus' life, standing at the foot of the cross and caring for Jesus' mother afterward. John's Gospel offers a deeply theological perspective, exploring Jesus' divinity and mission in a way that sets it apart from the other accounts. Andrew, Peter's brother, often referred to as the first called, is a striking example of quiet but impactful discipleship. Unlike his brother Peter, who is often at the center of the Gospels, Andrew worked more in the background, yet his actions were foundational to Jesus' ministry. Known for his humility and willingness to introduce others to Jesus, Andrew's first encounter with Jesus came through his connection to John the Baptist. As a disciple of John the Baptist, Andrew was already searching for spiritual truth when he encountered Jesus. According to the Gospel of John, after John the Baptist identified Jesus as the Lamb of God, Andrew and another disciple followed him. Andrew's response was immediate and enthusiastic. He spent time with Jesus, became convinced that he had found the Messiah, and quickly sought out his brother Simon Peter to share the good news. He declared, "We have found the Messiah," and brought Peter to Jesus, an act that had a ripple effect on the course of history. John 1, verse 41-42. Throughout Jesus' ministry, Andrew demonstrated a heart for evangelism and a gift for recognizing opportunities to bring others to Jesus. One of the most well-known instances of this occurs during the feeding of the 5,000, as recorded in the Gospel of John. Faced with a crowd of hungry people, Andrew found a boy who had 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. While he acknowledged the apparent inadequacy of such a small offering, he still brought the boy and his food to Jesus, saying, "But how far will they go among so many?" John 6, verse 9. This act of faith, trusting Jesus to work with what seems like so little, set the stage for one of the most famous miracles in the New Testament. Another moment that highlights Andrew's open-mindedness and willingness to include others comes in John 12, verse 20-22. When a group of Greeks approached the disciples wanting to see Jesus, it was Andrew, along with Philip, who brought them to him. Andrew's instinct to connect outsiders with Jesus demonstrates his understanding of the inclusive nature of Jesus' mission. He wasn't limited by cultural or religious boundaries, instead focusing on bringing as many people as possible to Christ. Although Andrew isn't as prominently featured in the Gospels as Peter, James, or John, his behind-the-scenes work was vital. He didn't seek recognition or status. His priority was simply to serve Jesus and spread the gospel. This humility is perhaps one of Andrew's most defining traits. He was content to work in the background, quietly facilitating connections and creating opportunities for others to encounter Jesus. Church tradition tells us that Andrew's ministry extended far beyond the borders of Judea after Jesus' resurrection and ascension. He is believed to have preached in regions such as Greece, Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, and Scythia, an area near the Black Sea. Andrew's missionary work carried him far from his home, and he is credited with spreading the gospel to many remote regions. Andrew's martyrdom reflects his steadfast faith and dedication. According to tradition, Andrew was crucified in the Greek city of Patras. However, he requested to be crucified on an X-shaped cross rather than a traditional one, feeling unworthy to die in the same manner as Jesus. This cross, known as the St. Andrew's Cross, has become one of his enduring symbols. His humility, courage, and unwavering faith leave a lasting legacy in the Christian tradition. Next, we turn to Philip, another one of Jesus' 12 disciples. Philip was from Bethsaida, the same town as Peter and Andrew, and like them, he was likely a fisherman before being called by Jesus. His introduction to discipleship is recorded in the Gospel of John, where Jesus simply said to him, "Follow me." John 1, verse 43. Without hesitation, Philip left everything behind to follow Jesus. One of the first things Philip did as a disciple was share the news of Jesus with his friend Nathanael, who is often identified as Bartholomew. Philip told him, "We have found the one Moses wrote about in the law, and about whom the prophets also wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." John 1, verse 45. When Nathanael expressed skepticism, famously asking, "Nazareth, can anything good come from there?" Philip didn't argue or try to persuade him. Instead, he simply said, "Come and see." John 1, verse 46. This response reveals Philip's practical nature and faith in allowing Jesus to speak for himself. Philip's practical mindset is also evident in other parts of the Gospels. During the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus tested Philip by asking him where they could buy bread for the crowd. Philip's response was focused on the logistical impossibility of the situation. It would take more than half a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. John 6, verse 7. While his answer was pragmatic, it also showed his limited understanding of Jesus' power at the time. Another key moment involving Philip occurs in John 14, 8-9, during the Last Supper. Philip asked Jesus, "Lord, show us the Father, and that will be enough for us." Jesus' response was both a gentle rebuke and a profound teaching moment. "Don't you know me, Philip, even after I have been among you such a long time? Anyone who has seen me has seen the Father." This exchange highlights Philip's desire for clarity and deeper understanding, even as he struggled to fully grasp the spiritual truths Jesus revealed. Tradition holds that Philip continued to spread the gospel after Jesus' ascension, preaching in regions such as Phrygia and Asia Minor. Like many of the other apostles, he faced persecution for his faith and was ultimately martyred. Bartholomew, also known as Nathanael, is another fascinating figure among the 12 disciples. His first interaction with Jesus, as described in the Gospel of John, reveals his skepticism and honesty. When Philip told him about Jesus of Nazareth, Nathanael was doubtful, questioning how anything good could come from such an unremarkable town. Yet when Nathanael met Jesus, his doubt quickly turned to faith. Jesus greeted Nathanael by saying, "Here truly is an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." John 1, verse 47. Surprised, Nathanael asked, "How do you know me?" Jesus replied, "I saw you while you were still under the fig tree before Philip called you." John 1, verse 48. This display of supernatural knowledge astonished Nathanael, prompting him to declare, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." John 1, verse 49. Nathanael's story shows how an honest skeptic can become a devoted believer through a personal encounter with Jesus. While the Gospels don't provide extensive details about his later life, church tradition holds that Bartholomew traveled widely to spread the gospel, preaching in places like India, Armenia, and possibly Arabia. According to tradition, he was martyred for his faith, with one account stating that he was flayed alive before being beheaded. His unwavering commitment to Jesus, even in the face of such a brutal death, speaks to the depth of his faith. Each of these disciples, Andrew, Philip, and Bartholomew, played unique and critical roles in the story of Jesus and the early church. While their personalities and circumstances differed, they were united in their dedication to spreading the gospel. Andrew's humility and instinct to connect others with Jesus, Philip's practical nature and desire for understanding, and Bartholomew's transformation from skeptic to believer all serve as powerful examples of faith in action. Their stories remind us that discipleship takes many forms. Some work in the background, quietly supporting the mission, while others are bold in their evangelism. Yet all are called to the same purpose, to follow Jesus and make his message known. These men may not have always understood the full scope of their mission, but their willingness to trust Jesus and step into the unknown continues to inspire believers to this day. Next, we turn to Matthew, the tax collector, whose life demonstrates one of the most striking examples of transformation among the 12 disciples. Before meeting Jesus, Matthew, also known as Levi, worked as a tax collector in Capernaum. In the eyes of his fellow Jews, tax collectors were seen as traitors, collaborators with the Roman Empire, and often associated with greed and corruption. They were despised for exploiting their own people, overcharging taxes to line their own pockets while working for the oppressors. Yet it was precisely this man that Jesus chose to become one of his closest followers, illustrating the radical inclusivity and grace at the heart of his mission. The calling of Matthew is recorded in the Gospel of Matthew 9, verse 9. As Jesus walked along, he saw Matthew sitting at his tax collector's booth and said to him, "Follow me." Without hesitation, Matthew got up, left his post, and followed Jesus. The simplicity and immediacy of his response highlight Matthew's willingness to leave behind a lucrative career for the uncertainty of discipleship. This was no small decision. Matthew's profession was financially secure, but also socially isolating. By following Jesus, Matthew not only left his wealth but also embraced a life of humility and service. Shortly after his calling, Matthew hosted a banquet at his home for Jesus and the disciples. Many other tax collectors and sinners were present at the gathering. This drew sharp criticism from the Pharisees, who questioned why Jesus would associate with such people. "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" they asked. Matthew 9:11. Jesus' response was profound. "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." Matthew 9, verse 12 to 13. This moment encapsulates the heart of Jesus' ministry, a mission to seek out and redeem those whom society had cast aside. While Matthew's actions during Jesus' ministry are not as prominently featured as those of Peter, James, or John, his inclusion among the 12 underscores the transformative power of grace. As someone who had been considered an outcast, Matthew likely brought a unique perspective to the group, especially in his interactions with other marginalized individuals. Matthew's most enduring contribution to the Christian faith is, of course, the gospel that bears his name. Traditionally attributed to him, the Gospel of Matthew provides one of the most comprehensive accounts of Jesus' life, teachings, death, and resurrection. It places a strong emphasis on Jesus as the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies, connecting him directly to the Jewish tradition. Matthew's Gospel is particularly known for its inclusion of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, a cornerstone of Christian ethics and spirituality. In this sermon, Jesus outlines the principles of the kingdom of God, including the Beatitudes, which emphasize humility, mercy, and righteousness. Through this Gospel, Matthew contributed to shaping the theological foundation of Christianity, and his writings continue to inspire and guide believers around the world. According to church tradition, after Jesus' resurrection and ascension, Matthew traveled far and wide to spread the gospel. Some accounts suggest he preached in Ethiopia, Persia, and possibly other regions. Like many of the apostles, Matthew is believed to have been martyred for his faith, though the exact circumstances of his death remain unclear. Thomas, often remembered as Doubting Thomas, offers one of the most human and relatable journeys of faith among the 12 disciples. His story is defined by moments of skepticism, courage, and ultimately profound belief. While he is best known for his doubt following Jesus' resurrection, Thomas's other interactions with Jesus reveal a loyal and inquisitive disciple. One of Thomas's first notable moments occurs in John 11:16. When Jesus announced his decision to return to Judea after hearing of Lazarus' death, the disciples were hesitant. Judea was dangerous, and they feared for Jesus' life. Yet Thomas, in a moment of boldness, said to the others, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." This statement demonstrates his courage and his deep loyalty to Jesus, even in the face of potential danger. However, Thomas's defining moment comes after Jesus' resurrection. When Jesus first appeared to the other disciples, Thomas was not present. The others told him, "We have seen the Lord." But Thomas was skeptical. He famously declared, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." John 20, verse 25. This moment of doubt earned him the nickname Doubting Thomas. but his reaction is deeply relatable. He wanted tangible proof, a concrete experience of the risen Christ. A week later, Jesus appeared again, and this time Thomas was present. Jesus invited him to touch his wounds and see for himself. Overcome with awe and belief, Thomas exclaimed, "My Lord and my God." John 20, verse 28. This declaration is one of the clearest confessions of Jesus' divinity in the New Testament. Jesus' response, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed," is a reminder of the faith required to follow him, even without physical evidence. Thomas's story doesn't end with his doubt. After this transformative encounter, he became a devoted and courageous evangelist. According to tradition, Thomas traveled to India, where he established a Christian community that endures to this day. The St. Thomas Christians in the Indian state of Kerala trace their spiritual lineage to his missionary work. Thomas is said to have been martyred for his faith in India. According to tradition, he was speared to death while praying. His willingness to travel so far and ultimately give his life for the gospel reflects the strength of his faith after overcoming his initial doubts. Thomas's story is a powerful reminder that questioning and seeking understanding are part of the journey of faith, and that even the most skeptical hearts can be transformed. Thaddeus, also known as Jude or Judas, son of James, is one of the lesser-known disciples, but his story reflects quiet devotion and steadfast faith. His name, which means heart or courageous, suggests qualities of loyalty and compassion. Thaddeus is mentioned in the lists of apostles in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, though his actions during Jesus' ministry are not extensively recorded. One notable moment involving Thaddeus occurs during the Last Supper. In John 14, verse 22, after Jesus spoke about revealing himself to his followers, Thaddeus asked, "Lord, why do you intend to show yourself to us and not to the world?" This question reflects his desire for clarity and understanding. Jesus responded by emphasizing the relationship between love, obedience, and divine presence. "Anyone who loves me will obey my teaching. My Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them." John 14, verse 23. After Jesus' resurrection, Thaddeus continued to spread the gospel, according to church tradition. He is believed to have traveled to regions such as Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, and Persia, modern-day Iran, where he preached and performed miracles. Some accounts even associate him with the establishment of the Armenian Church alongside Bartholomew. Thaddeus is traditionally credited as the author of the Epistle of Jude, a brief but powerful letter in the New Testament. The epistle warns against false teachers and urges believers to contend for the faith. Jude 1, verse 3. It emphasizes the importance of remaining steadfast, building up faith, and relying on God's mercy. Like many of the apostles, Thaddeus faced martyrdom for his faith. Tradition holds that he was beaten to death with a club, a brutal but common fate for early Christian missionaries. Despite his relative obscurity in the Gospels, Thaddeus' legacy as a devoted follower of Jesus and a courageous preacher of the gospel remains significant. James the Less, also known as James the Younger, is another disciple about whom the Gospels reveal little. His title, the Less, may refer to his stature, age, or prominence in comparison to James the Greater, the brother of John. While his actions during Jesus' ministry are not recorded in detail, James the Less is consistently listed among the 12, affirming his importance in the group. Church tradition identifies James the Less as the son of Alphaeus, and some traditions suggest he may have been related to Matthew, as both are referred to as sons of Alphaeus. His mother, Mary, is mentioned in the Gospels as one of the women who followed Jesus and witnessed his crucifixion. Mark 15, verse 40. This connection indicates that James the Less may have come from a family deeply committed to Jesus' mission. Though James the Less does not appear prominently in the Gospel narratives, his quiet presence reminds us that not all disciples were called to take center stage. Some, like James, served faithfully in the background, contributing to the spread of Christianity in ways that may not have been as visible but were no less vital. After Jesus' ascension, James the Less is believed to have continued preaching the gospel. Some accounts suggest he ministered in Egypt, where he was eventually martyred for his faith. Like Simon the Zealot, James's story highlights the diversity of the 12 apostles and the different roles they played in the early church. Together, Simon the Zealot and James the Less represent the quiet but essential work of discipleship. While they may not be as well known as Peter, John, or James the Greater, their inclusion among the 12 serves as a reminder that every disciple, no matter their background or prominence, has a significant role in the mission of Christ. Finally, we come to Judas Iscariot, the most infamous of the 12 disciples. His name has become synonymous with betrayal, and his actions ultimately led to Jesus' arrest and crucifixion. Yet Judas's story is complex, raising questions about free will, redemption, and the nature of sin. Judas Iscariot was likely from the town of Kerioth in Judea, making him one of the few disciples who was not Galilean. The Gospels do not provide details about his early life or what led him to follow Jesus, but like the other disciples, he was chosen by Jesus and played an active role in his ministry. Judas was entrusted with the group's finances, serving as the treasurer. This responsibility indicates that the other disciples initially trusted him. Though John's Gospel later reveals that Judas would sometimes steal from the money bag, John 12 verse 6. The reasons behind Judas's betrayal have been the subject of much debate. In Matthew 26 verse 14 to 16, Judas went to the chief priests and asked, "What are you willing to give me if I deliver him over to you?" They offered him 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave in ancient Israel. Judas accepted the offer and began looking for an opportunity to betray Jesus. Some scholars suggest that greed motivated Judas, as the Gospels portray him as someone who was concerned with money. Others argue that Judas may have been disillusioned with Jesus' mission. As a Jew living under Roman rule, Judas may have expected the Messiah to lead a political revolution and overthrow Roman oppression. When it became clear that Jesus' kingdom was not of this world, Judas may have felt betrayed himself and sought to force Jesus' hand by orchestrating his arrest. The Gospels of Luke and John also suggest a more sinister influence. Both accounts state that Satan entered Judas, implying that his actions were part of a larger spiritual battle, Luke 22 verse 3, John 13 verse 27. Yet even with this explanation, Judas is not absolved of responsibility. He made a choice to betray Jesus, and the consequences of that decision were devastating. The betrayal itself unfolded during the Passover week. At the Last Supper, Jesus revealed that one of the disciples would betray him, saying, "The one who has dipped his hand into the bowl with me will betray me." Matthew 26 verse 23. When Judas asked, "Surely you don't mean me, Rabbi?" Jesus replied, "You have said so." Matthew 26 verse 25. Later that evening, Judas led a group of armed men to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus had been praying. Judas had arranged a signal. "The one I kiss is the man. Arrest him." Matthew 26 verse 48. He approached Jesus, greeted him with "Rabbi," and kissed him. A gesture of friendship and respect turned into a mark of betrayal. Jesus responded with calmness and sorrow, saying, "Do what you came for, friend." Matthew 26 verse 50. After the betrayal, Judas was overcome with guilt. When he saw that Jesus had been condemned to death, he tried to return the 30 pieces of silver, saying to the chief priests, "I have sinned, for I have betrayed innocent blood." Matthew 27 verse 4. But they dismissed him, saying, "What is that to us? That's your responsibility." In despair, Judas threw the money into the temple and went away to take his own life. According to Matthew 27 verse 5, he hanged himself, and the field purchased with the returned silver became known as the Field of Blood. Judas's tragic end serves as a sobering reminder of the consequences of betrayal and the weight of guilt. His story also raises challenging questions. Was his betrayal predestined, or did he act of his own free will? Could he have sought forgiveness, as Peter did after his denial of Jesus? The legacy of the 12 disciples doesn't end with their lives. It continues to echo through history. These 12 men, with their doubts, flaws, fears, and triumphs, represent humanity in its rawest form. Their stories resonate because they show that faith is not about perfection, but about persistence. They were ordinary people who made mistakes, yet through their relationship with Jesus, they were transformed into the pillars of the early church. Their shared mission, to carry the gospel to the ends of the earth, required courage, resilience, and an unwavering belief in Jesus' message of salvation. Most of them paid the ultimate price for their faith, facing martyrdom with steadfast conviction. The fact that their message has endured for over 2 millennia is a testament to the profound impact of their lives and their obedience to Jesus' calling. Peter, the fisherman-turned-church leader, reminds us that even the impetuous and flawed can grow into bold leaders. Andrew shows us the power of quiet service and evangelism. James the Greater, the first to be martyred, teaches us the importance of unwavering faith, while John, the beloved disciple, demonstrates the depth of love and theological insight that can flow from a close relationship with Christ. Philip and Bartholomew, Nathanael, remind us of the value of curiosity, practical thinking, and openness to divine truth. Thomas, who questioned but ultimately believed, shows that doubt is not the end of faith but a step on the journey toward it. Matthew, the tax collector, embodies the transformative power of grace, proving that no one is beyond redemption. Thaddeus and James the Less remind us that even those who work quietly in the background play critical roles in God's plan. Simon the Zealot shows that passionate and even radical pasts can be reshaped for God's purposes. Finally, Judas Iscariot, though remembered for his betrayal, leaves a sobering lesson about the consequences of misplaced priorities and the need for true repentance. The disciples' diverse backgrounds underscore a powerful truth. The gospel is for everyone. Fishermen, tax collectors, revolutionaries, skeptics, all were invited into Jesus' inner circle. This diversity also reveals the remarkable inclusivity of Jesus' mission. In calling these men, Jesus brought together individuals who might never have associated with one another, and he united them around a common purpose. Their lives also reflect the cost of discipleship. Jesus never promised them an easy path. In fact, he warned them that they would face persecution and suffering. Yet, through their trials, they remained faithful. Their willingness to endure hardships, imprisonment, and even death speaks to the strength of their convictions and the transformative power of their encounters with Jesus. In our own lives, the stories of the disciples serve as both mirrors and guideposts. Like Peter, we may have moments of boldness, followed by moments of fear. But we can always return to faith when we allow God to strengthen us. Like Thomas, we might question and demand answers, but those questions can lead us to a deeper understanding of who Jesus truly is. Like Andrew, we may find ourselves working in the background, quietly leading others to Christ without fanfare. And like John, we might strive to cultivate a life centered on love, compassion, and a close relationship with Jesus. The diversity among the disciples speaks to the inclusiveness of the gospel. Jesus chose people from all walks of life with different personalities, strengths, and weaknesses to show that no one is beyond God's call. From the fiery zeal of James and John to the quiet humility of Thaddeus and James the Less, from the skepticism of Thomas to the bold enthusiasm of Philip, we see how God can use a wide range of gifts, experiences, and even flaws to accomplish his purposes. Their lives also highlight an essential truth. Discipleship is costly. Jesus himself made this clear, telling his followers, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." Luke 9, verse 23. For the 12, this wasn't just a metaphor. It became a reality. Most of them faced persecution and martyrdom, willingly giving their lives for the gospel. But it's not just their deaths that inspire us. It's the way they lived, the way they endured trials, and the way they stayed committed to the mission, despite their imperfections. Like Peter, who faced his fears to lead the church, and John, who remained steadfast even into old age, the disciples challenge us to persevere in our own faith journeys. Their lives show us that the call to follow Jesus is not about living a perfect life, but about staying faithful even when we fall short. It's about learning from our failures, growing through our struggles, and trusting that God can use us despite our flaws. Their collective journey reminds us that discipleship is not a solitary endeavor. The 12 were called not just individually, but as a group, a community bound by their shared faith and mission. Together, they supported one another, learned from one another, and carried the message of Christ to the ends of the earth. Their story is a reminder that faith is strengthened in fellowship and that we too are called to walk alongside others as we live out our faith. Even Judas's story, though tragic, offers an important lesson. It shows us the dangers of letting greed, disillusionment, or bitterness take root in our hearts. Judas was part of the same community as the other disciples, witnessed the same miracles, and heard the same teachings. Yet his choices led him down a path of betrayal and despair. His story reminds us of the importance of staying vigilant in our faith and turning back to God when we fall. Unlike Judas, Peter also betrayed Jesus, but instead of succumbing to despair, he sought forgiveness and was restored. As we reflect on the 12 disciples, we're reminded that their mission didn't end with them. The Great Commission to go and make disciples of all nations, Matthew 28 verse 19, is a call that has been passed down through generations. The church they helped establish has grown far beyond what they could have imagined, spreading across every continent and touching billions of lives. Today, it's our responsibility to carry on their work, sharing the message of Christ through our words, our actions, and our love for others. The disciples teach us that our own calling may not be easy. We may face doubt, failure, rejection, or even persecution. But their stories encourage us to remain steadfast, to trust in God's plan, and to remember that even our small acts of faithfulness can have a ripple effect far beyond what we can see. What can we take from their example? First, we are reminded that God often calls the most unlikely people to do extraordinary things. Fishermen, tax collectors, zealots, and skeptics all were chosen to be part of Jesus' inner circle. This means that no matter who we are, where we come from, or what we've done, we are not disqualified from God's call. If we are willing to follow, God can transform our lives and use us for His purposes. Second, the disciples show us the importance of trust and obedience. They didn't always understand what Jesus was doing, and they often stumbled along the way. But they stayed the course, and through their faith, God worked through them to change the world. In the same way, we may not always understand where God is leading us, but we are called to trust Him and take the next step in faith. Finally, the disciples remind us of the power of grace. They were flawed, imperfect people who made mistakes. Peter denied Jesus, Thomas doubted, and even John and James displayed ambition and selfishness. Yet Jesus forgave them, restored them, and used them to spread His message. Their stories remind us that no failure is too great for God's redemption. As we consider their legacy, we're left with a challenge. How will we respond to the call of discipleship in our own lives? Will we have the courage to leave behind what is familiar, as Matthew did? Will we have the humility to serve quietly, as Andrew did? Will we remain faithful in the face of trials, as James the Greater and Simon the Zealot did? Each of us has a role to play in continuing the work of the 12 disciples. Whether our calling is to lead, to support, to teach, or to serve, we are all part of the ongoing story of faith. Their example invites us to embrace our faith fully, not just as a set of beliefs, but as a way of life. Like the disciples, we are called to live boldly, to love deeply, and to proclaim the gospel through our actions as much as through our words. Their legacy is not just something to admire, it's something to emulate. The 12 disciples may have walked the earth 2,000 years ago, but their impact is felt every day. Through the scriptures they helped preserve, the churches they established, and the countless lives they touched, their influence endures. And now, the responsibility to carry that message forward rests with us. As you reflect on their stories, may you be inspired to live with the same courage, faith, and devotion. Let their lives remind you that, like them, you are called to something greater. Whether you find yourself in the spotlight like Peter, or working quietly in the background like James the Less, your role is significant, and your faithfulness matters. Thank you for joining this exploration of the 12 disciples. May their lives encourage you to step boldly into your own calling, knowing that God can use you, just as He used them, to make an eternal difference in the world. Stay tuned for more content that delves into the stories, teachings, and lives of those who have shaped the Christian faith, and may you continue to walk in purpose, faith, and love.